And I think it should be good. I think it's Hazaribagh is now different from what it was when I drove there years ago. Yeah? And in fact, your Udan scheme has transformed places like that. People have got aspirational. They want to fly to Ranchi to reach Hazaribagh now. You know, Hazaribagh is no longer the Hazaribagh of yesteryears. You transformed it in 2 terms that you've been serving. So I think
हम लोग अब जंगल में मंगल करते हैं.
Thank you very much. And it is 7:30, and we begin on time, as I told Manisha earlier. So, Dr. Raghavan, our Secretary General, starts the proceedings.
Sir, welcome our honorable guest today, Mr. Jayant Sinha. Welcome all the participants. Today is the last day of our webinar series 3, Think Global, Act Indian. So we are fortunate to have Mr. Jayant Sinha, Honorable Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha, and the Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, former Union Minister of State for Civil Aviation, and former Union Minister of State Finance. And he'll be addressing today on building an AtmaNirbhar Bharat and the importance of commercial coal mining. So we are also fortunate to have Dr. Maisha Priyam Sahay, who she will be interacting with her anchor. We thank the sponsors, OPG Power, IG3, and the Olympiad Group. I request Mr. Ganapathy, President SICCI, to formally welcome. Is also the chairman of the Trigen Group. Mr. Ganapathy, to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan. And at the outset, let me wish all of you good health, stay safe, and take the privilege and honor of, as in my capacity as president of one of India's oldest chambers of commerce, Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and welcome you all to this final portion of the 3rd webinar series. For the benefit of Mr. Jayant Sinha and Dr. Maisha Priyam Sahay, I wish to say that ever since India went into a lockdown around 24th of March, we have been getting experts to share their thoughts on how we can come out of it and go forward with hope and with a lot of ideas to take India forward in consistent with our Prime Minister's, Honorable Prime Minister's dreams. To that end, we've had series of lectures, industry experts, economists, journalists across sectors we've had, including media personalities and entertainment vertical specialists sharing their thoughts. Today, we come to the final portion of the 3rd series, and it is our collective privilege and honor to have Mr. Jayant Sinha with us. But ahead of that, let me introduce what I heard famously at a book launch of Dr. Maisha Priyam. The chief guest said, "What do I say about Maisha? Ghar ka beti hu." And to me, it's the same feeling that we have. Maisha is part of our family. It is our privilege and honor, Maisha, to welcome to the oldest Chamber of Commerce. And for those who'd like to know more about you, Dr. Maisha Priyam is an academic, a researcher, and she works on issues of development and politics in India. Not many have this. She has a doctorate from the London School of Economics and Political Science in International Development, where she examines the politics of education reforms in a comparative perspective. She has over 2 decades of experience working with donors, policymakers, administrators, and stakeholders in policy formulation. Her perception on the nation, the politics of the nation, and the economic development of the nation has made sure that she is constantly on one major television channel or the other, sharing her views to the people of India. It is my great privilege and honor that Dr. Maisha Priyam Sahay will be in conversation with a person, or should I say a personality of unmatched eminence and arguably one of the most eloquent speakers on either side of the divide. 1985 IIT, MS from Pennsylvania in 86, both with distinction, MBA from with distinction in 92 from Harvard, partner in McKinsey, worked with Courage Capital, partner with Omidyar, 2-term MP from Hazaribagh, Jharkhand, and he is going to talk about what I thought is could well, in my opinion, coming as I do with a bit of power in the IT background, I venture to believe this reform is bound to leave its footprints in the sands of time. The importance of commercial coal mining. Please welcome the one and only Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament from Hazaribagh. He is also the chairman of the Standing Committee for Finance, Parliament of India. He has earlier served as Minister of State for Finance and Minister of State for Civil Aviation, and did some transformational work in either place. As Minister of State for Finance, the IBC was his initiative, and the UDAN scheme, about which we were talking earlier, another great initiative of his. SICCI feels privileged and honored that Maisha Priyam Sahay is going to be in conversation with Mr. Jayant Sinha on the importance of commercial coal mining. The mic is yours, Maisha. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ganpat, for this very, very profuse, warm, and personal introduction. I don't deserve much of what you said, but all thanks to you. And the stage that you give to us today is really one of the oldest that we have in the country. And I would say the only one that takes the enterprise of nation building with all its seriousness. You have an illustrious history. And I would say, don't call this the last webinar. Just have one more where you tell the country of the history of how an area-based, region-based Chamber of Commerce has had so much to contribute to the enterprise of the nation. What we understand as India today is in fact a conglomerate of a coming together, of a coalescing together of many forms of regional enterprise. The big enterprise ship of India post-nationalization, and I'm aware that your father, the first Indian Administrative Service officer to lead this country with the spirit of public interest and national interest both, had great relationships with many former prime ministers, including Indira Gandhi, who took on the concept of national interest. But as she was doing this, she was helped very much by chief ministers who were driving the spirit of enterprise down south, down the Vindhyas. So much of what happens down the Vindhyas continues to fuel not just the spirit of enterprise, but also the two other key spirits that drives India today, the spirit of social justice and the spirit of social reform. And I would say that these triad of ideas was something that came into existence very much by the support of the spirit of social work, of public interest, and that was at the core of the building or coming together of the eminent men, the missing women then, but the eminent men who put together the SICCI. It would be very, very informative for us to go down history, just as you close down on this series of webinars. Now, I'd like to take no more time because you've had such a beautiful introduction of Jayant that I can say nothing else, but 2-3 things about Jayant Sinha that strike me, that here was a person who was at the peak of success of globalization, everything that the temples of modern India could give to him. He'd been through the portals of the esteemed IIT, the IIT Delhi. I know Ganpat also, and I'm sure many others on this webinar panel that we put together today must have been through this eminent institution. But he also then went on to excel at some of the finest institutions of the world. And he did this at a time when the world was not flat, the world was not one. It was with difficulty that you took even a flight out of India, out of Delhi to get to the US. So he did all that and then decided that it was very important to go local, that it was very important to do something called constituency service. If you look at his profile, I would say up until 2000, it was always considered that a person of this profile should make it to the upper house, the House of Lords, the Chamber of the Uppers. And that house is something that he declined. He took on the tough spirit of fighting the general elections from Hazaribagh, the place that now beneath the ground in Hazaribagh lie some of the finest coal mines of this country. And as Jayant pens it down very well, that we have some of the largest reserves of the world He puts the numbers at the 5th largest, if I am correct. Maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong. But that we happen to be one of the largest importers. So for Jayant, I believe that one of the most important things is that he begins to ideate with posers. For him, nothing is tabula rasa. For him, the world begins with a poser. And I think this issue that he takes up, the AtmaNirbhar Bharat issue, and how commercial coal mining can be central to it, is something that he begins to ideate with a conundrum. Why do I have the most and why do I not have still? So he begins with what we have and what we do not. And he puts these seemingly opposed ideas together. He brings them together to evoke the sense of dialogue, to evoke a sense of discourse about what are seemingly very challenging contemporary issues. Now, the Atmanirbhar Bharat issue, for one, is an old idea. If you go back to our struggle against colonialism, used at the peak of the first wave of anti-colonial movements, the Swadeshi movement was the first time that the Congress starts using it. So it's not as if it's a partisan idea of one political party. Another political party used it to build mass mobilizations around it. But this wasn't the only time that it was used. You have had another phase post-independence during the war with China. Now, that history that the Congress party itself does not want to write, but the history, for example, of Shastri, the eminent Prime Minister of India, and that Atmanirbhar Bharat almost said, don't use wheat. And those of you who will remember that part of our history, now Lal Bahadur Shastri, we today have SOPs that say, don't have more than so many guests for weddings. That's because of the fear of contact and disease. But Lal Bahadur Shastri literally put a diktat and said, don't serve anything made out of wheat at these weddings. And there are very eminent classical musicians today who've told me that for their daughter's wedding, because of the Atmanirbhar or self-reliance concept that was promoted by Lal Bahadur Shastri, they served even sweets made out of potatoes. So that was another wave. The third one, of course, was the Dirigiste command and control model, which Indira Gandhi promoted. It also led to the most specific poser that I hope Honorable MP Jayant Sinha addresses, and that was the nationalization agenda. Now, the coal mining nationalization was an addendum to it, was an annex to it, had caveats to it, but the coal mining that was an issue in the state list was taken up in the national interest and nationalized as a national subject. Now, how much of that nationalization, how much of that, I would say now, bogey of self-reliance, does this wave of saying that we'll go commercial with coal mining, how much of that do you reverse now? Do you respond to contemporary challenges? What is it that is the core and meat of the Atmanirbhar thinking in the call for commercial coal mining? And when you pose the questions about state interest as being opposed to the national state policy statement, and you build in very well and you say, okay, I see the nation doing, the center doing this, and I see the state doing this. I also see that you evoke the local and you say that there must be a policy response that builds in the local. And ultimately, that is where I see the heart of Jayant Sinha, building in the local into dialogues that could very well be global, that could be about national self-reliance. And I think he puts forward very nuanced arguments. I wouldn't take away the substance of any of his very, very nuanced and fine thinking on the issue. After all, he's the man on the ground. After all, he's the man who's put in not one, but now the second term beginning of a directly elected member of parliament. Over to you, Jayant Sinha ji. And I look forward to listening to your rich ideas, replete with all the conundrums, and perhaps getting some thought pathways into your complex thinking about how you see as contributing towards the making of an Atmanirbhar Bharat. Thank you. And I look forward to hearing you now, Jayant Sinha ji.
Thank you very much, Manisha ji. Thank you very much, Ganpati ji. Both of you have been most kind in your introductions, but also most enlightening and very, very thoughtful in the way that you have both introduced your institution as well as Manisha ji in the manner in which you have introduced the issues that are actually tangled up with this idea of Atmanirbharta and commercial coal mining. So thank you very much for those very excellent very thoughtful introductions. As I said at the outset, I am here in Hazaribagh in Jharkhand, so very much in the epicenter of coal production in India. And in my role as chairman of the finance committee and in the work that I do with global interlocutors, I get to see the global issues, I get to see the national issues. But to your point, Manisha ji, as the MP from Hazaribagh, dealing with day-to-day issues, I also get to understand and hear at great length and with great passion the issues that people are facing on a day-to-day basis when this kind of coal mining begins to take off. So in that sense, it's a unique perspective that I have been able to gain through my experiences. And I think to some extent I've tried to include that in the article that I wrote and which I sent out to you all. But I'll try and illustrate that through my comments this evening as well. And rather than making it another sort of long, boring, long-winded set of remarks, I'll just speak for about 10 or 15 minutes largely to introduce the key themes, the key issues. And then I'd be very happy to engage in a dialogue, in a discussion with you all about some of these knotty issues that this topic really sets up. But before I do that, a couple of quick pointers. One, I do want to talk about the economic situation as it is right now. And why is it that AtmaNirbharta, and it's a new generation of thinking around AtmaNirbharta, has come up, and how it's conceived of right now, which is different both from the Swadeshi thinking of the independence movement, as well as different from Manisha ji, as you mentioned, the PL 480 era, where India lived from, as they famously said, from ship to mouth. So we are not in that ship to mouth phase, but we are in a different era now of globalization, and AtmaNirbharta has taken on a new meaning. So I want to talk about that new era, what AtmaNirbharta means in this new era, and then I'll come and spend most of my time on commercial coal mining to illustrate why this is such a good example around this whole new idea of AtmaNirbharta. So first, let's talk about where are we right now with respect to India's economy, the global economy. You all know very well that these are very unprecedented times. The numbers are absolutely staggering. They're mind-blowing. I'm 57 years old, but in my lifetime, and I've been somebody who has been deeply involved in business and the national and global economy for decades now, I have never ever seen times like this. The last time India faced a genuine recession when GDP declines was in 1980. But even then, the GDP decline was -1%, -2%, if I remember right. This time we are going to see a GDP decline of at least -4 to -5%, again, as per the IMF projections. So we've never in independent India's history seen a recession of this type. To go back to this kind of economic decline, we have to go back to 1918, 1919, to the Spanish flu, which took away some 6% of India's population. There was, in fact, a population decline in that decade, which is extraordinary. Never before in India's history was there a population decline over a decade. And of course, the economy was badly affected back in 1918-19 because of the population decline that we saw then due to the Spanish flu. This is what we are confronting right now. And again, this is something that the world is confronting everywhere around the world. We are seeing nations struggling with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And unlike the global financial crisis, which was something that is better portrayed as a North Atlantic financial crisis and one which was largely restricted to the financial services sector, this is one which is across the board and across the world. It is affecting every sector of the economy. It's affecting every country. So it's a very, very difficult time as far as the economy is concerned. And we are going to have to deal with it not just this year, this is fiscal 21, but over the next 2 or 3 years, because it's going to take that long to be able to get past this set of circumstances. And of course, as a result of this, with all the lockdowns, all of the constraints in terms of travel of people, travel of capital, movement of goods and services, we have a situation where supply chains have been deeply disrupted, flow of people, flow of capital has been deeply disrupted, and that really has brought to the surface once again issues of resilience, issues of competitiveness, issues of self-reliance. And that really is the way in which we need to think about AtmaNirbharta in this new, much more difficult phase of globalization that we are going through right now. I have written extensively on another set of topics around gated globalization, how on different sort of dimensions, whether it's technology, whether it's people, whether it's capital, globalization, rather than being open globalization, is going to become gated globalization. There'll be shifting blocks of nations that will set up various kinds of gates, various kinds of barriers. And all of this means that India can get locked out. India can be on the wrong side of technologies. India can be on the wrong side of capital flows. And as a result of that, it's even more important that as far as our comprehensive national power is concerned, our interests for our population are concerned, for our industry and our businesses are concerned, that we are able to deal with all of these pressures, all of these challenges, and be self-reliant and be resilient. And that, I think, is the way in which we have to think about AtmaNirbharta. We do not want to be in a situation where we don't have alternatives, we don't have substitutes, we don't have backups, we don't have safety nets, so that when there is a major supply disruption, we are in a situation where we become very vulnerable and very much weakened. We are already seeing in some ways the price of vulnerability when our opponents are arrayed across our various borders and are trying to hem us in. This is where AtmaNirbharta, this is where resilience, this is where competitiveness becomes very, very important. Now, to my mind, AtmaNirbharta is really made up of three concepts. The first one is competitiveness, which is that if you can't produce goods and services in a way that's globally competitive, or you're not integrated into global supply chains, where the position that you occupy as a very competitive supplier, competitive producer, would mean that you get cut out of supply chains. We have to be supremely competitive to be able to maintain our position, to be able to be AtmaNirbhar, be self-reliant. The second aspect is sustainability, because we are not going to be self-reliant if we are running out of water, if we run out of carbon space, if we run out of the ability to grow our crops because of pollution, air pollution, and so on. And of course, public health issues like the coronavirus pandemic. So one is competitiveness, the other is sustainability. And sustainability, I mean in a broader sustainable development goals perspective. So sustainability is the second aspect of AtmaNirbharta. And then the third aspect of AtmaNirbharta is resilience. That means if there is a big shock, big external shock, big internal shock, we have the ability to recover, we have the ability to move forward. So AtmaNirbharta equals, in my mind, the equation as an engineer. Of course, I have to think of it in sort of these quantitative terms. AtmaNirbharta, which means the ability to chart our own destiny, the ability to control our own destiny, the ability of not having to be beholden to any other nation, means competitiveness plus sustainability plus resilience. That equation for me defines AtmaNirbharta. Now, if that is AtmaNirbharta, if we have to be both competitive, sustainable, and resilient in the long run, energy security starts to occupy a very, very important role. Now, sadly, we as a growing economy have to import the bulk of our energy supplies right now. The bulk of our energy supplies for fossil fuels. Of course, in power generation, by and large, we have become more and more independent with respect to our natural gas imports and so on. But with respect to fossil fuels for transportation and other usage, our energy security is very much at risk. And it is because of two sets of fossil fuels, oil and natural gas. And we import about $120 billion of oil and natural gas every year. $120 billion. Number one import is oil and natural gas. Number two, of course, gems, jewelry, gold, and so on is there. But the number two major import for us is coal. We import, and this is actually quite a staggering number, that we import $23 billion, 1.7 lakh crores, a fifth of our coal requirements are actually imported. So even though we are the world's 5th largest coal reserves country, we have the 5th largest coal reserves in the world. We are also the 2nd largest coal importer in the world. We import some 250 million tons a year, $23 billion worth of coal. It is our 3rd most important import, and it makes us dangerously reliant on a few suppliers, like, of course, South Africa, like Australia, and our number 1 supplier of coal. Ladies and gentlemen, our number 1 supplier of coal, 60% of our coal comes from Indonesia. So Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, Australia, these are our 4 major suppliers of coal. 60% of our coal comes from Indonesia. We import $23 billion a year, 250 million tons a year of coal. This is certainly something we will have to address if we want to be AtmaNirbhar. Now, much more difficult for us to be AtmaNirbhar when it comes to oil and natural gas. We simply don't have the reserves. But when it comes to coal, both thermal coal for power generation and coking coal for steel production, for both of those different types of coal, we have ample reserves in India. In fact, Jharkhand is the number 1 state in the country. About 26% of India's coal reserves are in Jharkhand. And Hazaribagh and Ramgarh, the 2 districts that fall in my constituency, represent some 8 or 9% of India's coal reserves right here in Hazaribagh, Ramgarh, because we have the north, we have the Karanpura coal field, which is now the richest and the largest coal generating coal field in India now. The Karanpura coal field runs right through Ramgarh, right through Hazaribagh, and into Chatra, which is the adjoining district. This is India's richest coal reserves right in this Karanpura coal field. Now, with the coal available here and the, in very, very high priority that we need coal for our energy security, it's very important for us to start to think about how we can generate coal so that we substitute the coal that we have to import 50 million tons of the for coal over the next decade or so. So estimates are that in the next decade or so, need about 1.5 billion tons of coal, 1.5 billion tons of coal. The thinking is that we need to go from about 723 million tons of coal, that is our current production, to 1.5 billion. That means we have to double our coal production. Now, obviously, from a carbon emissions perspective, that's a very serious matter. I'm not going to get into that set of issues. That's another very complicated set of issues around climate change, which India is dangerously vulnerable to. But let me not go there, because that in itself is a very complicated set of issues. But what I will say is that for our energy generation, for our power generation, for cement, for steel, for brick production, for all of these requirements, coal is vitally necessary, and it's required over the next decade or so, that as our economy doubles, that we will double our coal production. So we will go from 723 million tons of coal required right now to 1.5 billion tons of coal. Coal India today, of the 723 million tons, Coal India produces 83%. 83% of the coal today is in the public sector. The rest, about 17%, is largely captive coal mines. There's very little commercial coal mining. So 83%, about 600 million tons of coal is produced by Coal India. The thinking is in the next decade, Coal India will increase from 600 million tons a year to 1 billion tons a year. This is what Coal India is supposed to do. And the 500 million tons that we require over the next decade, that is going to have to come from import substitution as well as stepping up commercial coal production in India. So 500 million tons of coal production has to come from the private sector, from the commercial sector in the next decade or so. This is a staggering number. Today, the total coal production is 700 million tons. And we are saying in the next decade, and by the way, we have been mining coal in India, as you know, for 150 years. 150 years we've been mining coal. Started in West Bengal. And since then, in 150 years, we've gone to reach 700 million tons. And now we are saying in the next decade, we are going to have just the commercial sector produce 500 million tons of coal. 500 million tons of coal. Now, to get started, even as Coal India is massively expanding, as I said, they have to go from 600 million tons to 1 billion tons. Even as they are expanding their production, our commercial coal sector has to virtually go from a standing start to 500 million tons. Now, Coal India does not have the financial resources, the capacity, the human resources to be able to pull this off. There is no way that Coal India can expand capacity from 600 to 1.5 billion tons by themselves. We need the private sector to come in. And there's been an effort for decades now that coal blocks get auctioned, that they get auctioned transparently, and that the private sector come in. But it has not happened. The UPA tried it. We, of course, know what happened with the coal scam. Then our government in 2014 tried to auction coal blocks, not very successful. And so what we are trying to do now with the latest set of policies that have been promulgated for coal mining is we are completely and thoroughly opening up the coal sector, thoroughly opening it up. So you can bid as somebody who has zero experience in coal mining. You can get up to 100% FDI into the mining sector. You will just bid on a revenue share basis. You don't have to put a lot of upfront capital into this. You only have to put in about 500 crores if it's a large coal block, 100 crores if it's a small coal block. You bid on a revenue share basis, and you are paid in a very transparent basis using the National Coal Index. So the policies that the government has come up with are very liberal. They have thrown open the coal sector. It's like the liberalization of the aviation sector, the liberalization of the financial services sector. That's the kind of liberalization that we are talking about when it comes to coal. And it is a tectonic shift in the coal sector, akin to Mrs. Gandhi nationalizing the coal mines back in 1971. It's the complete other side of that approach. Instead of nationalizing, we are absolutely opening up the coal mining sector. And as the coal minister, Shri Prahlad Joshi ji, has said in his interviews recently, there's been tremendous interest. Some 1,100 companies have expressed interest in commercial coal mining. 41 coal mines are to be commercialized. The total production from these 41 coal mines is expected to be 225 million tons, which will, obviously, hopefully enable us to stop importing coal. And the capex required is about 33,000 crores. Revenue generation will be 35 to 40,000 crores. It'll generate some 3 lakh jobs. So the numbers are staggering. The numbers are huge. For a state like Jharkhand, what it means is that our total mining royalties right now, 4,200 crores. If the 9 mines for Jharkhand reach the production that they're expected to, they themselves will generate royalties of 3,000 crores. 3,000 crores. That's 75% of our total coal mining, of our total royalties, iron ore plus coal mine, 4,200 crores right now. It'll make a huge difference in the revenue generation for the Jharkhand government and enable us to undertake a lot of policies and welfare schemes that we cannot do right now. Employment generation in Jharkhand is about 50,000. So very important to do this from an AtmaNirbharta point of view. Very important for India to do it from an energy security, an import substitution perspective. Hugely important to drive economic growth, to drive jobs. For all of these reasons, the government has thrown open the coal sector in an unprecedented way. It's like, as I said, the liberalization of aviation or telecom or any of these sectors in the past. Now, here comes the rub. Here comes the issue. Even as the central government is opening up the coal sector, at the ground level, in Jharkhand, the Jharkhand government led by Shri Hemant Soren ji is opposing. They're saying the timing is not right. They filed in the Supreme Court. They want to block commercial coal mining. And there are many reasons for it. I'm not going to get into the illegal coal mining, the coal mafia, all of that. All that is operating. People want to control that, deal with that in many ways. So that in itself is a fact. But what has been advanced as the reason why this should not happen, and I know about it because I have dealt with it extensively over the last 6 years. Much of my time as an MP has gone in dealing with coal-related issues, particularly in Badkagaon, Keredari, and in Ramgarh over the last 5 or 6 years. We've had firings We've had people killed. We've had tremendous Jan Andolans, and I have spent a tremendous amount of time dealing with the situation on the ground in remote parts of my constituency. You have to drive for 20 kilometers in a forest before you get to where the coal mining is starting to happen. And of course, it's forest land. Nobody should be owning it, but there are Moolvasis, Adivasis, all types of people there who make a living of these remote forested areas. And it's gorgeously beautiful. Friends, that part of India is incredibly beautiful. We have all kinds of wildlife. We have elephants, we have hyenas, we have deer, of course, we have wild boar, and I've seen all of this. All of this, the wildlife, the forests, the birds, all of this are going to face tremendous pressure when this kind of coal mining starts. So on the one hand, we really need it for the country. On the other hand, the impact on the ground in terms of pollution, in terms of resettlement, in terms of crime, in terms of traffic, in terms of impact on the lifestyle, impact on the environment is extraordinary. And as a result of that, the kind of Jan Andolan, the kind of people's campaigns that we see against this, both are justified and at the same time very difficult to handle because they are very, very, clear and very, very justified in their grievances. So it's a very, very difficult set of issues to start coal production at this scale. This is the scale we are talking about, this quickly, because we're talking about a decade. And one day, if you all come here, or if I can take some pictures and show you, you will see that when we start producing from these coal mines, and this has happened with Pakri Barwadi, literally just 25, 30 kilometers from where we are here in Demotan, within a year, there is this massive open cast mine that gets created. Hundreds and thousands of trucks move back and forth. There's tremendous traffic, tremendous pollution that gets created. And it's very, very sad to see how quickly that whole area gets degraded and how the quality of life for people is destroyed. So friends, this is a very complicated, difficult set of issues. We absolutely need to do this, but we have to be mindful of all of the challenges that we face on the ground in terms of resettlement, rehabilitation, and the impact it has on people's lives. Now, I've spoken to the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Coal Minister. They're absolutely familiar and aware of this set of issues. They're very sensitive. They are very much in tune with what is required to deal with all the issues on the ground. They have assured their full support to the Jharkhand government, to local administration, through Coal India, through the companies that will be coming here. Nonetheless, it's going to be a difficult exercise persuading people, because when you ask them whether they want coal mining, in most cases they will say no, because they look at the litany of issues that you have to deal with. So it is on the ground a difficult, complicated set of issues. I've dealt with it over the last 6 years. I will have to deal with it at length over the next few years. But it represents, as Manisha ji said right at the outset, an amalgam, a melange of issues ranging from global issues of climate change, of shifting to renewable energy, to the issues of India's AtmaNirbharta, India's self-reliance, to the issues of a state government and the revenues of a state government, very much down to Pakri Barwadi, down to Peto Panchayat, down to Peto Panchayat. And Peto Panchayat mein पानी जो है वो काला हो गया है, कुएं से पानी जो आ रहा है उसमें इतना प्रदूषण हो गया है, सॉरी टू स्विच टू हिंदी, बट आई एम श्योर यू अंडरस्टैंड, ये आज इन लोगों को साफ पानी नहीं मिल रहा है क्योंकि कोयले का धूल सब जगह है, कुएं में पानी भर गया है कोयले से, उसका क्या हम लोग करेंगे, ये भी इसका हम लोगों को समाधान करना पड़ता है. सो द range of issues is extraordinary. We need the state capacity, we need the sensitivity, we need the good governance to be able to deal with it. This is an example of how India's development is challenged and made difficult by all of these sets of very real, very important human issues that pertain to development when it takes off at the ground level. It's easy to talk about it in Barcelona and in Edinburgh and in Rio de Janeiro and New York and even in Delhi. It's very difficult to talk about it in Peto Panchayat, ladies and gentlemen, and that's the reality we have to deal with. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions you all might have.
Thank you very much, Jayant ji. Thank you very much. that indeed brings forward to you, and you can hear directly now from Jayant how this presents a melange of issues, very complicated, but the ease with which he's able to build it together, giving you the complexity of the overall policy of why it would be important for us to look at self-reliance or import substitution as an important element. I mean, that's absolutely elementary. That why would we sitting on large reserves yet importing the most? I mean, this is not such a critical value element that you import to increase or enhance the efficiency of your production line. You just substitute what you have. You don't want to get into the litany of issues. And you say, rather than deal with the issues, I might as well just bring headloads of it from Indonesia or from Russia or from South Africa. I mean, those are, so we are saying that the paper process of importing it is simpler than the people's process of dealing with your own embedded sovereignties. And after all, what are national sovereigns? National sovereigns are first and foremost geographical entities. They are territorial entities. What are the soldiers fighting for? That inch to inch of ground. So what is it that lies beneath your own ground is a national sovereign. And I think the issue that comes here really, Jayantji, the first question that I would like to still pose to you, which you did refer to, that there is a national announcement, and then there are claims not just now by Hemant Soren, but also Chhattisgarh, which also has abundant reserves after Odisha. I think Odisha has kept quiet, but Chhattisgarh chief minister has also said what he had to. So here's a situation where you need to build what could be called innovatively as a political commons. Now, to reverse the Indira Gandhi moment, which was the subsuming of anything that existed on the ground with the states, you know, all resign, all change, and Indira Gandhi is going to be the supreme, and you wanted to build up the Dirigiste command and control, which he did. You'd be aware of the Santosh versus Union of India, that famous case where the courts ruled that the caveat provision that the Tatas could hold on to their own captive mines, notwithstanding nationalization. So those kind of prevented those arenas from getting into the Dirigiste command and control model. Now, when you lower down those command and controls, when you bring in the Peto Panchayat into a new process of Atmanirbharta, what is it that you think about in terms of creating the political commons? How is it that the center shares with the states first up? And how do we ensure that the state in turn shares with the Peto Panchayat or many more panchayats that have their own embedded ground realities? And once you take that on, I'm going to then, you respond once to this general comment, and then I'm going to open it up to the many beautiful comments that I can see in the chat box, and I will raise them to you one by one. You take them either collectively, 2 or 3 in a bunch, or you respond to them as you like. So over to you once again, and then I'll come back with the chats.
Thank you, Manisha ji, for some very insightful points and an excellent question, which is really this question around how do you build a new political commons? How do you build a way in which from the panchayat level to parliament that consensus view that we must on this endeavor? It's very difficult to do that because I think really there are 2 or 3 factors that come in the way. One, of course, is the whole issue of who bears the cost, who bears the pain, right? The winners and losers are at very different level. So the winners are, consumers at large, the India's macro situation, India's foreign exchange reserves, India's national security. These are things that are abstract and they are valued in Mumbai and Delhi, right? So that's where the winners are. The losers are in Chatti Baryatu, they are in Pakri Barwadi, they are in Keradari, they are in Peto Panchayat. This is where the losers are. And so with the winners and losers being in very different places, achieving alignment becomes, first of all, very difficult. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 comes to the whole issue of state capacity. If the winners and losers are so widely dispersed, do we have the state capacity to be able to reconcile that, to be able to ensure that those that are benefiting are able to deal with the problems and challenges of those that are losing. So do we have the state capacity to intermediate that divergence of winners and losers? And then the third issue is one of simply of money. Where does the money flow? And how does the money flow? And this is both legal as well as illegal money flows that are associated with mining. Now, obviously, I think as far as our government is concerned, we have been extremely generous, far more generous than any other government in terms of sharing royalties, whether it's state royalties or district royalties in terms of the district mineral fund. It's never been done before that so much money is being channeled back into these local communities. So our government has done a tremendous amount in this regard. But even then, you can, potentially say that more should be provided, or it should be provided in a different way. So there is a bit of a food fight around how the money should be shared. But even if the money is available at different levels of government, do we have the state capacity to deploy it properly? Do we have the state capacity to prevent it being leaked out through criminal and illicit activities? That's the state capacity issue. And then if the state capacity is even there, are we going to be able to sort through the winners and losers in a way that's fair, equitable, and sustainable in the long run? So these are the difficult issues which make it very hard for us to achieve political alignment around all of this. We muddle through it, we stumble through it as best as we can, but achieving political alignment on this set of issues becomes quite difficult.
Thank you very much. I think that's indeed a very, very complicated response once again. You've plotted out the map, the arena in terms of winners and losers, the dispersal in geography. How do you embed interests together and create something that's somewhat win-win, though with different levels? I mean, a fair, equitable, and sustainable model of distribution is what you talk about. And those could very much form the pins on which the policy underpinnings of a center and state dialogue could indeed be built. But these are all out there, the compact building of the big Leviathan, talking to the discrete elements of the smaller compact building around natural resources, and how it would indeed be realized in practice, that remains for a future horizon. And perhaps we hope Jayant is able to lead some of the discussions on these issues, since he understands very much the winners out there, and he lives every day. As you can see, he's flown in straight from Boston to Hazaribagh. So his life is very much around what we would call the constituency of losers, the constituency that he says is very real around the Peto Panchayat, the Badka Gaon, and all the other places that he's talking about. These geographies sort of come alive. Now with this, I'll also open up the discussion. I can see some very beautiful questions from all over the world. In fact, there's Karthik Menon, who's saying hello from Singapore. And he says it's a great and a fantastic idea to bring Jayant ji and Manisha ji together. His kudos to SICCI. Yes, I second him. Kudos to SICCI for giving us the opportunity to talk about what we think are some of the key issues staring us very much in the face. There's Bharat Tripathi, and he feels, Jayant ji, that like you, he's very much a Bihar person. So Bharat thinks of Bihar and Jharkhand as a combined entity still. He's also a Harvard alum. He's very happy to hear from you and hear your AtmaNirbhar Bharat ideas. And he's talking about a small eatable item called sattu, which he says that he's found now made in Chennai and packed in Chennai. So he feels that we should be creating an environment in which we create such products and make people at the grassroots self-reliant. So produce at the ground and pack and sell in Chennai is what Bharat is talking about. And he has a lot of affinities in terms of geography and in terms of an institutional affiliation with you, Jayant ji. There's also Anuj Kaura from New Delhi. He's saying hello to all of us. Divyang Bhandari and Shreyas are coordinating on our behalf. Thank you very much. The first question, though, still comes from Ganapati Ramchandran and Mike Murlidharan. May I pose both the questions together? Even as I can see lower down in the chat box, Ravichandra Babu Damodaran, he's also addressed a question which is very, very similar. So I'm going to first pose the questions from Ganpat. Coal as fuel for power generation in an era of cheap renewables, is this a challenge? So that's a question that you kind of made a mention of, and I had kind of thought about that we were dealing with one element of the classification, one of the bigger alternate or rival explanations to the energy sustainability issues was also the fact that we need to look at renewables. So would you like to comment on the coal and renewables bit? And the second question coming from Mike Muralidharan is, why was commercial mining, coal mining not taken up for so many years? What that could have reduced, when that could have reduced the country's fiscal burden? So you can see that both in Ganpat's question and Mike Muralidharan's question, you're being goaded, Jayantji, to look at the alternate and rival scenarios and the what if questions if we did commercial coal mining in the last so many years, and if we looked at other sources of cheap renewables. Over to you, Jayantji, with these two questions.
Sure, Manisha ji. So let me answer these questions in turn. The first question really is coal versus renewables. Why are we ramping up coal production when we should be ramping up renewables? That's question number one. And question number two, why has commercial coal mining languished for all these many years? Does that mean that in the future also we expecting not such good results? So let me answer both questions in turn. Coal versus renewables, I think, is in some ways a bit of a false trade-off, because it's coal and renewables. We need both coal and we need renewables. India is ramping up renewables. And we, of course, have a very, very ambitious set of targets as per the Paris Agreement for solar energy in India. And even on some of our coal mines, they are in fact putting in solar panels as well. So even right there on the coal mine, we are also doing solar power generation. So it's not either or, it's both coal as well as solar. And as you know now, the levelized cost of solar energy is actually lower than that of thermal coal now. So renewables are very cheap, very cost effective, and increasingly they will displace new coal power. In fact, there's a very interesting two factoids I'd like to present to you. That one, that in fact almost the world's largest and last outside of China ultra thermal power plant is being set up in my own constituency in Patratu, where we are putting up a 4,000 megawatt super thermal power plant. But that's almost going to be the last one. After that, nobody's going to build thermal power plants of that scale. But because we have a large installed base of thermal power plants and they're only running right now at 50-60% capacity, we still have tremendous installed capacity for coal. And obviously electricity demand will grow and generally tends to grow 1.1 times is the elasticity with respect to GDP growth. So we have 6-7% GDP growth, then over the next 10-12 years, we are going to double. And therefore our energy generation, our electricity requirement will double. And our coal plants, the existing coal plants, without even adding new coal plants, will need more and more coal. And so again, as I said, it's not either or. We will add significantly to renewable, while at the same time taking our installed base of coal-fired power plants and continuing to expand their usage of coal as well. And of course, we don't want to import that coal. We want to have that coal being produced locally in India. So this is something that is happening very naturally with respect to the installed base and with respect to the growth in GDP that we are expecting and the growth in electricity usage that we are expecting. So again, as I said, it's a false trade-off. It's not coal versus renewables. Most of the incremental new capacity will be renewable. Most of the existing installed capacity will continue to operate, but even that will grow and will require more coal. So that's essentially how that plays out. Now to the question of why commercial coal mining has not grown in the last decade or so. I think it's largely because we didn't quite have the right set of policies to have the private sector come in and participate in commercial coal mining. There were end-use restrictions. There were a lot of restrictions on FDI. There were restrictions in terms of mining equipment, surveying. It was a fairly bureaucratic exercise to get your mining plans approved. So we didn't really tackle it from the point of view of unleashing the private sector. And I can tell you my own experience from Udan, where we've opened up some 35-40 airports, increasing India's airport capacity by 50% in just 3 years, that if you get the incentives right, then the private sector will step up, the private sector will participate, the private sector will make the necessary investments. And so without the right mix of policies, without the right policy package, I think this had not taken off. And I think now they've hit the nail on the head with the very liberal, with the very thoughtful set of policies that have been announced. And I think this time it's going to work like a charm. So I think it's going to take off now. In the past, we haven't quite got our policy package right.
Thank you. There's a question from Ravichandra Damodaran Babu. Good evening, Mr. Sinha. With the liberalization of coal industry in your speech, wouldn't it be a conflicting activity since globally disruption is taking place in favor of green renewable power? Wouldn't it add to the various other issues to implement the liberalization efforts? Also, the Kyoto Protocol, which India is a signatory, all of this conflict with this new initiative. So some of these ideas that you've just spoken about answer quite a few points, but if you'd like to have another go and answer a little more to Ravichandra Babu's question.
So let me talk about the Paris Agreement, Manisha ji, because we are very much on track and we'll probably exceed our NDCs, nationally determined commitments. So we will exceed our Paris Agreement NDCs even on the trajectory that we are on, even with doubling of coal usage, because our energy intensity per unit of GDP is dropping, which is what we had advocated. And secondly, we are building out a renewable power generation capacity also very, very quickly. So our two major NDCs, one which relates to gigawatts of renewables that we will have in place. If I remember right, it was 175 gigawatts is what we said for Paris. And I think we are very much on track for that. And secondly, our energy intensity is going to come down by some 30%, 35%. That is going to be achieved even as we ramp up coal-based thermal power generation and coal mining. So we will be meeting our Paris agreements even with this increase in coal mining.
Yeah, so there's another question which Shreyans has posted. I can't see the name on this. Now, this question really that Shreyans has put together asks that similar problems would have been there in Indonesia and others. Can we learn from them for handling the situation on the ground? I'd just add to this that would you have illustratives from other cases, alternate scenarios, where they've dealt with complications of this kind and have lessons for us to unravel our policy package, given our federal situation, given the fact that there are issues on the ground. And as you said, there are Jan Andolans. That's a very important point. And I can see the SICCI out there. I would say that you haven't faced what Jayant is facing on a continuous basis. And as he rightly said, that lots of the issues that are being posed by the people indeed have correctness in terms of the issues they are raising, and the voice of the people needs to be heard in terms of the issues that they're trying to bring to the forefront. So would you like to give to us some highlights of alternate cases where complicated scenarios like this have been faced? And what about people's issues that you've made a mention of so many times?
Manisha ji, the unfortunate truth is that nowhere else in the world has this kind of unprecedented ramp up in mining been attempted. The coal being generated in Indonesia, in Australia, in Russia, South Africa, even in the US in places like West Virginia, Wyoming, which is where the coal production in the US is, in areas which are and as a result of that, we are not dealing with these kinds of people issues that we most of it are very densely populated areas, including in forest lands. We have large Adivasi populations that are in the forests. We have large from the natural sort of produce, the natural activities that have come to us from thousands and thousands of long this has persisted. In fact, and we are disrupting all of that. Of course, we have a lot of people who have their lives are going to be disrupted. They are not so much living in these areas. All of their lives are going to get disrupted. But you don't see this scenario, Manisha ji, you don't see this scenario of densely populated areas having to deal scale open cast mining, which is unprecedented in magnitude of how it gashes into the soil, rips out all of the soil, creates the overburden, takes over thousands of acres, and so on. So, in a largely forested area, fairly densely populated, to have this scale of mining activity is not something that most other countries have seen before. The only other country where some of this exists is Indonesia. But think about it this way: Indonesia is an archipelago of many, many islands, and their population is 200 million. The population of Jharkhand alone is about 35 million, right? So we are much more densely populated than Indonesia. No comparison with Russia or Australia or South Africa or Wyoming for that matter. So we have a very unprecedented set of issues that we are dealing with respect to coal mining.
So I would draw the lesson, therefore, from your answer, that our answers to this whole complicated melange of issues would really need to be our own. That's the broad lesson that I get. And therefore, the mapping of issues in all its complexity, the mapping of issues in all its clarity, I think is the first necessary step. And I can already see the elements of that clear-cut mapping and outlining in how you present this issue, not as something that's as straightforward as a ukase or a diktat or a dirigiste command and control, but something that needs to be delineated and worked out together. And I think that could be a complex but a win-win solution with multiple ways and multiple arenas and multiple weighted averages of who can get what, where, how much, how do you build in, how do you nest in the interest of people in the whole complex game of getting this resource out there. I think, time and again, the questions that I get, the questions are taking us to the frontiers of India, to moving abroad, but very much every time I can see Jayant, the constituency service representative, the public interest person, the people's person, Jayant is bringing the people back in, the questions are bringing the global back in. And here's one more from the global, so to say. This is from Habib Hussain, the global environment challenge versus national security. This confrontation was brought about by the erosion of globalized. Can that thought be reversed? So it's a thought question, Jenji. There's another one from Chora Nachar. In the interest of time, I'm clubbing them together, although they're not on the same themes. And Chora asks, will the states get fair royalty and benefits in the proceeds? These two questions, and then I'll kind of wind up, because I do think we are heading a bit out of time now. Yeah.
No, the first issue around the global environment really is an issue of climate change. And we will need a very long webinar to go through all of that. I have, in fact, in part because of this issue associated with coal and because of my interest in sustainability, which is a long-standing interest, I have dealt with it in great detail. And there is a report that I issued with colleagues at ORF called Getting to the Green Frontier, which you can obviously Google search and get hold of that report, Getting to the Green Frontier, where I've argued that we need a very different development model for India, which takes into account competitiveness and sustainability. Getting to the green frontier means essentially that we have to really think about alternate pathways which would enable us to move away from the use of fossil fuels, the use of coal, even more aggressively than we might want to with respect to the Paris Agreement. But that is not something that India can take on by itself. It requires technology, it requires capital, it requires expertise, which would be required or necessary from the entire global community for India to, do something quite different from what we are doing today. That is really something that the global community has to sign up for to be able to get us onto a different pathway. But I do believe that that's required because even if we meet, friends, our Paris agreements, we are not going to be anywhere close to the 2 degree centigrade limit or the 1.5 degree centigrade limit that we are aspiring to. We will be well north of that. And frankly, the Paris Agreement in that sense is not in any way going to be able to enable us to deal with these global issues associated with climate change and global warming. It's a very good first step. It's a necessary first step, but we cannot be satisfied. We cannot be satisfied with that. And I think what the coronavirus pandemic has shown us is that the cost of inaction, the cost of not taking these kinds of risks seriously, and pardon me, because I feel very strongly about this issue, to engage in a 30-second, 60-second digression on global pandemics and just say how much we have failed as a global community on handling these kinds of risks. The reality is, for 20 years, people have been saying, every public health expert, we are all learning about all of this. I didn't know this. It's after the pandemic hit us that I went back and I started reading all of this. For 20 years, and especially after SARS in 2003, ladies and gentlemen, after SARS in 2003, every public health expert has been warning about a catastrophic global pandemic. And guess what? Did we do anything about it? No. And that's why we are sitting in our rooms, in our homes right now, in lockdown mode, really suffering tremendous global damage, $10 trillion of global damage. $10 trillion of global damage because we were not willing to do $10 billion of risk management around. These are stakes that are going to be magnified 1,000 times when it comes to global climate change. Is any one of you interested? Does any one of you care? Sorry to be a little provocative about this. But how many of us have genuinely educated ourselves to what it's going to cost if we don't get global climate change right? So as I said, the Paris Agreement is required, but it is not by any means sufficient. And we are going to face catastrophic consequences from global climate change. This has been the second warmest year after 2016 on record already. The Arctic ice is melting at an unprecedented rate. How is all of that going to impact our environment? Who the hell knows? But is anyone doing what is necessary to do the risk management around it? We failed catastrophically as a global community when it came to the pandemic. Catastrophically. When the answers and the requirements were in plain sight. What are we going to do about global climate change, folks? So those that bring up the issue that as far as global climate change is concerned, we've got to be thinking much more aggressively with respect to moving to renewables and other decarbonization steps. I'm fully with you. Please read my report on getting to the green frontier. Absolutely
Okay.
to do that. So that's really important. We certainly need to do that. Sorry, as I said, for the digression. Manisha ji is telling me I'm going to run out of time, so I will shut up.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Anyone who expected a linear and a non-tangential and a straight, non-complicated, speech on simply mining coal, you will realize that Jayant has appropriately ended it on talking about renewables. There couldn't be a better champion for the environment, for the renewables. But more than that, remember, he's talking about coal in conjunction with the black water. He's talking about coal in conjunction with the Kala Pani, the water that the people of Peta Panchayat say that they are mining in their wells to drink. So in any sense, whoever thought that this could be a simple issue or a question of go pick up your capital, get your building blocks ready and move in your CEOs and dig all of it in and put your revenue balance sheets together. Here is a most complicated statement of what could be done and what could be the possible pathways and what are the alternate scenarios. The alternate scenarios are actually lie in putting people back in, putting the globe back in, putting the global commons back in, and putting environment and nature back in. So if we were mining coal, how the hell would we do all of that? That's for the next webinar. May I now request on behalf of SICCI, having allowed us this brilliant platform to ideate and to speak with our minds in terms of who we think we are and our people, our land, our national interests. May I now request the most enterprising of them all, the SICCI Forum, the people who put together the enterprise of nation building, as I said, Mike Muralidharan. May I now request you to deliver the vote of thanks. And thank you very much on behalf of myself and Jayanji for having given us what we call the munch or the platform to speak out our minds in such a free and fair way. Mike, please.
Thank you very
Before
much.
Mike takes the mic, let me exercise my privilege as president to share a few thoughts. Manisha, you said don't stop here, have another webinar. In the last hour, we got clearance from a professor in Booth, Chicago. He's speaking on 30th July. We'll share some of few of these takeaways into that session as well. This is on 30th July between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. Somebody whom Jayant Sinha ji also should be knowing well. He's addressing us in his capacity as Professor Booth School. Anyway, I've never said no to you, Manisha ji, because you said that you must have another webinar. So we decided to have it in the last half an hour. We've been successful. And I would be, the heart is full, they say words of you. Jayant ji and Manisha ji, I know I've been pushing you for dates the past 1 month to slot this in to suit this. I'm so delighted and honored that we are ending this very successful webinar with this lecture. I think the people all over SICCI and the extended family of SICCI will relish this moment forever. SICCI, of course, is not alien to Mr. Sinha. He was here in Chennai a few years ago delivering a memorial lecture. The difference between that and this is we are not able to give you filter coffee, your favorite drink. So thank you once again. We thank our knowledge partner, MITRAA, whose idea it was to have this show. And I thank Sanjay Bhandari and his team for provoking us to get this going. And of course, Manisha ji, Ghar Ka Beti, for getting this going in a brilliant manner. And the sponsors who made this all possible. Mike, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Ganpa. And what do I say? Extremely energetic and what do you call a fantastic session. Good evening. It's my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of SICCI and my MITRAA. My heartfelt thanks to Mr. Jayant Sinha, Chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee in Finance and former Central Minister, for sharing his thoughts on the importance of commercial coal mining. How energetic it was. Your session was an eye-opener and provided a great insight on the topic. Coal indeed can truly become diamond for the country. You made us understand how vital commercial coal mining is in building an AtmaNirbhar Bharat. Energy security through our coal reserves will help us control our country's destiny and to build a resilient, self-reliant India. At this moment, when the economy is so badly hurt by COVID, when creation of employment is our topmost priority, this could be a key lever that can provide lakhs of direct or indirect jobs, especially in remote rural areas where many laborers have returned after the lockdown. Thanks, Dr. Maisha Priyam Sahay, political economist, for the wonderful introduction and also, shall I say, moderating or you were possibly answering quite a few questions. Fantastic support, madam. Thank you very much. I'm sure all the attendees would have enjoyed the session as much as I did. Thank you very much. I thank Mr. Ganapati, President of SICCI, Sanjay Bhandari, Jayant Bhandari, Kumarpal Chopra, and Team MITRAA for driving this initiative. I thank my fellow executive committee members of SICCI for their support, and I place on record my appreciation to Dr. Raghavan, Secretary, and Ms. Aishwarya, Joint Secretary, and the administrative team at SICCI for the support. While I thank all the attendees for being a great audience, my takeaway words, the last ones that Jayant Sinha said, that said it all when we were confused about how it will be with respect to our commitment to green. Competitiveness and sustainability. That's where the answer is, I suppose. Thank you and stay safe, everyone. And thanks to Ganpa. The pleasure is mine to say next time we meet with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night and stay safe, all of you.
My old friend and IIT classmate.
Yeah, that's right.
we'll be talking to you all next time. So
Both of you are distinguished alumnus of IIT Delhi. I went to IIT Madras, as you know. But we had one of the best inter-IIT meets was in Delhi, though. Thank you so much. Stay safe, all of you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Manisha.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
See you, Mike.